Hi, you, and welcome back to the bridge. Once again, a happy new year. I am wishing all of God's blessings for this year for you. May it be an absolutely amazing year. So, as you saw by the title of this video, today we're going to talk about finding accommodation when you have accepted an offer to study at a certain university, right? And honestly, all the things I'm going to say in this video come from my personal experiences and what I learned in my own search for accommodation. So take what helps you and leave what doesn't. Alright, so let's go back to a couple of years ago, like it was 4 years ago when I was searching for accommodation. So the university I ended up going to, I did not expect to go there. In other words, out of like the top 5 universities I wanted to go to, I didn't have a list, but it's just to say I didn't expect that I would go to the certain university. And because I didn't expect that go to it, I don't think I had applied for residence. Or else I had applied but didn't get accepted. But I generally think I hadn't applied for residence. Because of that, my parents and I arrived a day or two before orientation was supposed to begin and was searching for accommodation then. And so these are the things that I learned. I've also learned some of these things through other people's experiences and watching them search and find accommodation. And so yeah, the first thing that I would say, just overall, just like a general note, is if you're in this position right now and you're looking for accommodation and you don't know where to start, please don't panic. Try to stay calm, try to stay focused, try to stay, I don't want to rational, but don't allow panic to overwhelm you, because then panic leads to desperation, and then when desperation hits, then we are willing to take offers and make decisions that could be scams or things like that. I'll make a separate video on just briefly like trying how to avoid scams. But yeah, just try not to panic, try to remain calm, things will work out. So yeah, so let's get into it. How to find accommodation. So the first thing is, if you haven't found accommodation yet, first get onto your university residence waiting list. So I'm not exactly sure how the systems of every university work, but I know that you should probably have like a student login and a password or something. And if you go to accommodation or residence, I don't know, there should be a way that you can get onto a waiting list for university residents where you can be considered for placement. I just want to give a very important disclaimer, which is getting yourself onto the university residence waiting list does not guarantee accommodation. In fact, most times there is more chances that you don't get placed. And even if you do get placed, you might get placed after classes already start. So let me give you a bit of context into this, right? So remember when you were applying for university in grade 11, you had an option whether to apply for university residence, and then people who get accepted for university residence will get an offer and they accept it, and so they get placed at a certain residence, right? But when matric results come out, you'll find that some people don't meet the requirements, so they can't take their place in residence anymore, or some people decide to go to other universities and not this one, so their places aren't taken, or though their places become available, or some people just don't show up. But I would assume then they look at the university residence waiting list, and then they like pick from there, right? As I mentioned before, there is a chance that you may get an offer for university residents after classes begin, and that's because sometimes people decide to discontinue with their studies for various reasons. So there is that chance that like a month or two after university classes have already begun, then only you get an offer to get placed into a university residence. Once again, I'd just like to emphasize that this really is a backup thing. There's just such a high demand for placing in university residence, and there's usually so many students and too few places. So chances are one probably won't get it, right? But just make sure, because there's always just that small possibility that you could get a place. You place yourself on the university residence waiting list, and then you also search for private accommodation while those two are doing, right? And whichever one you get first, you go with that. Okay, so that's the first, is get yourself onto a university residence waiting list. Okay, the second thing is, after you do that, start looking for private accommodation. And I've mentioned in a previous video the difference between university residence and private accommodation. University residence is university run, the university manages all of it, it's university rules. Where private accommodation, usually a private company, private landlord. The university has really no saying in its running, like it's completely separate. It's just accommodation that is usually in the area, right? So there's different things that you can do when looking for private accommodation. Here's the first step. When you go onto your university website, usually the accommodation or residence page, there are things called university affiliated private accommodation, or university accredited private accommodation, or university recognized private accommodation. And this is private accommodation that isn't owned by the university, but it's kind of recognized, or like according to a website that I read, the university has kind of ensured that it adheres to certain safety standards or different, like it's just a university recommended private accommodation, right? So there should be a list of private accommodations that are recognized or recommended by the university. Just play around on your university website and there should be a list somewhere, or there should be someone to contact to find out if you can get a list of private accommodations that either are just generally available or private accommodations that the university recommends. So that's the other thing. I do also hear that university accredited or university affiliated private accommodations are also NSFAS accredited, but I would say do your due diligence and check with NSFAS to see whether or not it is NSFAS accredited as well. I'm not exactly sure how those systems work in terms of accreditation. I'm not sure whether university accredited also means NSFAS accredited, but just make sure that it is accredited. The second step when looking for private accommodation is to download apps. And this is how I found my accommodation. There are a few apps that I can recommend. The main one being Property 24. Other apps that I've seen before, Private Property, Facebook. So there have been times where I have seen private accommodations being advertised on Facebook, but be very careful when looking on Facebook and even the usual apps, Property 24 and Private Property, because there could be scams, there could be false advertisements, but again, I'll talk about that in the next video. So be careful of scams on platforms like Facebook, but generally Property 24 is one that I would very much recommend. So download the app that you would prefer, put in all your filters like your maximum, your budget, your area, location, and then search for property around that area. The other thing that I would do when searching for private property is this. There are usually rental companies that work in a certain area. So if you're going to be studying in Pretoria, or if you're going to be studying in, I don't know, Grahamstown or Stellenbosch or Cape Town or Joburg, there's usually reputable rental companies that work in that area. So what I did when I moved to university is I literally emailed people from rental companies and asked them for lists of available property in that area. And someone was literally kind enough to send that information to me. So I would say email people. So yeah, that's the third thing. Overall, when looking for private accommodation, its first thing is university accredited private accommodation. Second step is looking on the apps to see whether there's any available accommodation. Third thing is that you can email or contact people to ask for lists of available private accommodation in the area. Here's the last thing is before you search for private accommodation, just ensure that you have a criteria in mind. In other words, what are your must-haves and your things that you are willing to give up, things that you are willing to compromise on when looking for private accommodation. So for example, the main two things that people are very important to people is price and location. So price, what is the maximum amount of money that you are willing to spend per month on accommodation? If you are being funded by NSFAS, then they usually have a limit that they're willing to pay for accommodation. So ensure that your property doesn't go above that. I think they're referred to as NSFAS accredited accommodation. So ensure that your property is NSFAS accredited, right? So that's one of the things is in terms of budget, make sure you know what your budget is. In terms of location, know how far you're willing to travel. So a way to find this out is you can on Google Maps put the location of where you're going to study. So for example, if you know you're going to be studying engineering, you can put the address of the engineering faculty or the place where the location of where the engineering building is. You can put that on Google Maps, and then you can put the address of your potential accommodation or the private accommodation that you want to live at. You can put that address and then see the walking setting, right? How long it would take to walk from your private accommodation to the university residence. And this will give you an idea of what transport arrangements you would probably have to make. This will give you an idea. For example, if there's exams at night, or not exams, tests at night, because I remember we used to have tests like 5:30 in the evening until 7 or 7:30, and at times during winter it would be dark. So it just gives you knowing how long it takes to travel gives you an idea of the preparations that you will have to make or the steps that you will have to put in place in terms of transportation. Also, with certain private accommodations, they do offer shuttles. So if this private accommodation is a bit further away from university, the website will say we offer shuttles or this and that. And I know certain university residences also offer shuttles. So just check whether or not shuttles are offered. But remember that there are lift clubs. So there are students who live in that same area as well that you can ask, you can share lifts, and then you pay a certain amount either every day, every week, or every month, depending on the lift club. So that is an option as well. So just make sure that you know in terms of distance how far you'd be willing to live from university. Ask yourself this question: would you prefer to live further away from campus but pay less and then just make transport arrangements to and from campus? Or would you prefer to live close to campus but pay more, but they don't have to worry so much about transport arrangements, about getting to campus and back every single day? So it is definitely your decision to make. So yeah, I would say in terms of criteria, probably the top 3 things that you would be looking for are, is it NSFAS accredited? What's the price? Where's the location? And then another thing that is probably important as well is whether the property is furnished or unfurnished. So furnished meaning there's a bed, usually a desk and a chair, and then sometimes you'll find there is a I know where there was furnished, there was a microwave and there was a kettle as well. Furnished doesn't always include a kettle and a microwave, so just be sure to ask them what furnished includes. Guys, as you look for accommodation, I know that it can be stressful. Remember to stay calm. Remember that things will work out one way or another. Yeah, so the next video will be on scams. I think it's very important when searching for accommodation to be careful of scams, especially when one is desperate and you can see the deadline for, or the timeline for classes beginning getting closer and closer and closer, and you're just like, you're just willing to take anything. But we need to be careful with property. So yeah, I hope you have a really good week ahead. If you have anything else to add, maybe you've been through this experience before, please put it in the comments down below, because your experience could really help someone out there. Yeah, but I will see you in the next video, and yeah.